You know, there's a particular kind of pain reserved for fathers. The kind that sits heavy in your gut while you smile through clenched teeth, shaking hands and pretending like everything is exactly as it should be. That was me standing in that grand ballroom, the soft glow of crystal chandeliers above me, expensive champagne bubbling in every glass, and a string quartet humming away in the corner like we were living inside some picture-perfect fairy tale. It was my daughter's wedding day, the day I was supposed to be proud, the day I was supposed to hand her over to the man who promised to cherish and protect her. But as I stood there in my tailored black suit, I felt nothing but the slow burn of betrayal rising in my chest. The humiliation wasn't some accident. No, it was carefully orchestrated, a performance of sorts. They thought I wouldn't know. They thought I wouldn't find out. But I did. The whispers had started months ago. The late-night phone calls my wife tried to hide, the secretive conversations with my daughter's future in-laws, the money that seemed to vanish from our joint accounts. And then there was him, the groom. That smug little parasite in his custom tuxedo, flashing his porcelain smile like he belonged on the cover of a trust fund magazine. I watched him make the rounds, shaking hands, patting backs, whispering his fake words of gratitude to every guest. Every word scripted, every compliment hollow. What burned the most? My own daughter's eyes. Once full of light when she looked at me, now vacant. Manipulated. Bought and sold into a family that only saw my little girl as another chess piece in their power games. And my wife? She played her part perfectly. Dressed to the nines, laughing too loud, clinging to the groom's mother as if they were lifelong friends. The two of them whispered in each other's ears like high school mean girls at prom. My wife had chosen her side long before this day. Her loyalty was never to me, it was to status, to prestige, to money. The ceremony was tolerable. Barely. The priest droned on about love and unity while I gripped the arms of my chair so hard I thought they might snap off. The kiss, the applause, the carefully choreographed first dance, it all passed like a slow-motion car wreck I couldn't look away from. Then came the reception. This was where they made their move. As the father of the bride, I was seated just close enough to the head table to be seen, but not heard. I saw the looks, subtle glances passed between the groom's father and my wife, the hushed conversations between the wedding planner and the groom's mother. They thought they were so discreet. They weren't. And then came the real knife in my back. The MC announced that the father of the bride would not be giving the traditional welcome speech. Instead, the groom's father would be delivering a joint family message on behalf of both sides. I felt the collective hush ripple across the room. Some guests squirmed, others glanced at me with pity or curiosity, but no one dared to ask why. My own daughter couldn't even meet my eyes. I sat there and smiled. A tight, forced smile. Fine. They wanted to humiliate me? Let them. But they forgot one very important detail. I came prepared. As the toast began, the maid of honor gushing, the best man slurring through half-rehearsed jokes, I waited patiently. I nursed my whiskey, nodding along as if everything was fine. And then, right as the groom's father was about to conclude his polished, nauseating speech about blending two great families, I stood up. I held up my hand. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the ballroom like a razor. The chatter died instantly. All eyes were on me. I wasn't originally scheduled to speak tonight, I began, reaching into my suit jacket. But I believe this is as good a time as any. I pulled out the envelope. The envelope they feared. The envelope that held the truth. You could have heard a pin drop. My daughter froze in her seat. The groom's father went pale, his hand still clutching his champagne glass mid-toast. My wife? Oh, she was good. She kept that tight-lipped smile like nothing was wrong. But I saw it, the slightest twitch in her eye, the way her fingers dug into her clutch like she was trying to hold the world together. I let the silence breathe. Let them squirm. I looked around the room slowly, locking eyes with each and every one of them. Friends, family, business partners, people who'd known me for decades. People who had no idea what had been boiling beneath the surface for months. Then I spoke. Marriage is built on trust. On loyalty. On honesty. I paused, glancing at my daughter. Things that are not to be taken lightly. Things that some people in this room have chosen to abandon. The whispers started. Little gasps. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But no one dared interrupt. I held up the envelope. Simple white paper. No fancy seal. But inside was everything. For the last year, I have sat quietly while things unfolded behind my back. While arrangements were made, while agreements were signed, while certain people decided my daughter's future without her even realizing it. I turned my gaze to the groom's father. Isn't that right, Richard? He looked like a deer caught in headlights. His wife gripped his arm so hard her knuckles turned white. I see you've all grown accustomed to thinking of me as the working-class idiot in the room. The man who didn't belong. The outsider who somehow got lucky enough to have a daughter marry into your precious dynasty. Another pause. Let them feel it. But while you were busy underestimating me, I was busy learning, collecting, and documenting. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first document. I held it up. This is the contract you drafted, Richard. The one that ties my daughter's inheritance, the trust one built for her, directly into your company's future expansion. A contract you tried to hide by filtering it through shell corporations. But you got sloppy. You always get sloppy. Gasps again. People were starting to murmur. The MC looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. And here, I said, pulling out another sheet, is the evidence of the private meetings you held with my wife, behind closed doors, planning how to manipulate my daughter into thinking this marriage was her idea. Now my wife was visibly trembling. My daughter's face twisted in confusion, shock, and hurt. Her perfect wedding day unraveling before her eyes. And finally, I paused, letting my voice grow colder, sharper. The bank transfers. The payments made directly to your offshore accounts, Nancy. Payments that started right after the engagement. Quite the payday for selling out your own family, wouldn't you say? The room erupted. Gasps, voices rising, chairs scraping as people stood to get a better view of the carnage. I turned to my daughter, who was now crying. I'm sorry you had to find out like this, sweetheart. But they never gave me a choice. The groom shot up from his seat, trying to take control of the moment. This is outrageous, he shouted. You're ruining the happiest day of your daughter's life. I smiled. No, son. You already did that the moment you and your family decided to turn her into a business transaction. I folded the documents neatly, placed them back into the envelope, and slid it into my pocket. Then I stepped away from the microphone and left them to drown in the chaos. As I walked away from the microphone, the ballroom transformed into a battlefield. The perfect image they had tried so hard to project crumbled in seconds. Voices rose, some guests whispering in horror, others pulling out their phones, recording the unfolding disaster like hungry vultures. The scandal of the century was no longer whispered gossip. It was alive, breathing, and spiraling out of control. Richard, the groom's father, was the first to break. He shot up from his chair, his face flushed to deep crimson, pointing a trembling finger at me across the dance floor. You don't know what you're talking about, you pathetic little. Careful, Richard, I cut him off. My voice low but sharp enough to slice through his outburst. There are lawyers in this room. Half of them are your friends, sure, but none of them will want their names attached to what I've got in this envelope. The crowd hushed again. My wife, Nancy, still hadn't said a word. She sat there frozen, the color drained from her face. Her hand clutched the diamond necklace I had bought her for our anniversary last year. That same hand was the one that signed away my daughter's financial future behind my back. Funny how betrayal can look so quiet in the end. The groom, that smug, overconfident little vulture, tried to salvage it. Look, he said, raising both hands like a hostage negotiator. Let's not make a bigger scene than it already is. We can discuss this privately. As a family. I couldn't help but let out a short, humorless laugh. Family. I repeated. Is that what you call people you manipulate, lie to, and use for your own financial gain? That's not family. That's organized crime in designer suits. He started to speak again, but I stepped toward him. My voice dropped, quiet and lethal. The kind of tone that stops a man cold when he realizes he's underestimated you. You were never going to marry my daughter for love. You were going to marry her to acquire what your father couldn't buy outright. You were going to trap her, isolate her, and slowly drain the wealth I spent my entire life building. Now my daughter was sobbing, her makeup streaking down her face. She looked back and forth between me, her husband, and her mother, like the walls of her world were caving in. I didn't know, she whispered. Dad, I didn't know. I looked at her, my voice softening for the first time that evening. I know, sweetheart. And that's the only reason I'm still standing here. More guests had gathered around, some whispering into each other's ears, others recording everything like they were watching a reality show implode. The whole city would know by morning. The groom's mother finally stepped in, trying to restore some sort of order. Enough, she snapped. You've made your point. You've embarrassed your family, your daughter, and everyone here. You should be ashamed of yourself. I turned and looked her dead in the eye. No, I said coldly. The only thing I'm ashamed of is how long it took me to see what all of you really are. I could feel the heat building, but I wasn't done yet. Not even close. I still had one card left, one secret none of them knew I had uncovered. The real nail in the coffin. But that would come soon. Very soon. The ballroom was chaos dressed in tuxedos. You could practically feel the air growing heavier with every breath. I let them stew in it for a moment longer, because silence, when used right, cut sharper than any words. But inside me? Oh, I was steel. Controlled. Calculated. I'd waited too long for this moment to waste it with emotion. The groom, that little punk, was now stammering like a cornered animal. This is all just a misunderstanding, he croaked. Contracts, deals, you're twisting everything. No, son, I replied calmly. I'm revealing everything. I reached into my jacket pocket once more, but this time not for the envelope. No, this time it was for my phone. Since everyone seems to enjoy documentation so much, I said, my voice amplified by the still hot mic the MC hadn't dared shut off. Let me share something a bit more personal. I tapped the screen and connected it to the ballroom's AV system, which I had arranged beforehand, quietly. Always be prepared. The giant projection screen behind the head table came to life. At first, it was nothing but a still photo, my daughter and the groom, smiling together during the engagement photo shoot. A perfect image. Fake as hell. Then the slideshow began. First slide. Screenshots of text messages. The groom's text messages. The ones he thought were deleted. The ones he didn't know I had pulled from his burner phone, courtesy of a very skilled friend in IT security who owed me a favor. The texts weren't to my daughter. They were to her maid of honor. You could hear the collective gasp ripple through the crowd. You looked incredible last night. Don't worry, she'll never find out. Only a few more weeks and the wedding will go through. Then we can keep seeing each other on the side. Her father's money will fix everything. Just play nice for now. The audience went from scandalized curiosity to full-blown horror. The maid of honor, my daughter's best friend since childhood, went pale, her face draining of every ounce of color. She looked like a ghost sitting in designer heels. The groom's mother shot her an ice-cold stare, while my wife sat frozen, like a woman slowly realizing the ground beneath her feet was gone. I continued. This wasn't just a betrayal of my daughter, I said. It was a calculated, deliberate attempt to secure money, assets, and long-term control over her. You didn't love her. You were using her. I could feel my voice tighten. Not with anger, no, that had long passed. This was colder than anger. This was justice. My daughter isn't a pawn in your financial schemes. And she damn sure isn't property to be divided up between your boardroom puppets. At this point, some guests stood and left. Others stayed, unable to look away from the disaster unfolding. Phones were up everywhere, filming, documenting, guaranteeing this story would live online for years. The groom finally lost his nerve. You son of a, he lunged forward, but his own best man grabbed his arm, holding him back. I didn't even flinch. You touch me, I warned, and I'll bury you not just in lawsuits, but in criminal charges. The groom's face twisted with rage, but he froze. I wasn't finished. I looked at my daughter one more time. She sat trembling, tears streaming silently down her face. Sweetheart, you deserve better than all of them. Then I turned back to the crowd. And now that the truth's out, you can enjoy the rest of your evening. If any of you still have the appetite. I stepped away from the microphone once again. The orchestra had stopped. The servers had stopped. The entire event had collapsed into a silent funeral for what was once called a wedding. But I wasn't done yet. Because behind the scenes, the real destruction was just getting started. I walked out of that ballroom as calmly as I had walked in. My back straight, my head high. The storm was behind me now, but the echoes of it would be felt for a very, very long time. The hotel lobby was empty except for one man, my attorney. He had arrived right on schedule, as we had planned. You dropped the hammer, he said softly, falling in step beside me. That wasn't the hammer, I replied. That was the warning shot. He smiled grimly, understanding exactly what I meant. You see, the public humiliation, that was the easy part. The spectacle. The part that everyone would talk about, post about, turn into gossip at country clubs and boardrooms for months to come. But that wasn't my goal. No. The real goal was the destruction of the machine behind it all. The people who sat at that table and thought they could manipulate, extort, and destroy my daughter's future for profit. They thought I was just the blue-collar father, the man who worked too hard, who didn't understand their world of power plays and silent deals. They underestimated me. That was their first mistake. The second was assuming I didn't have leverage. And leverage, oh, I had plenty. I handed my attorney a flash drive as we stepped into the parking garage. "It's all there," he asked. "Everything," I said. "Financial records, shell company transfers, falsified contracts, offshore accounts, insider trading, years of it. And every document has Richard's signature somewhere on it." My lawyer let out a low whistle. "They're finished." "No, not yet," I said, opening my car door. "Tomorrow, we deliver this to the authorities. After that, then they're finished." He nodded. "And your wife?" "Ah, yes. My dear, sweet wife. The silent co-conspirator who smiled in my face while selling out her own family behind my back. She'll find out her new life as a silent partner in Richard's companies was bought with stolen funds. When the Fed sees the accounts, they'll seize hers too." He shook his head in disbelief. "You're a cold son of a—" "No," I interrupted. "I'm a father, and I'm in every word." I pulled out of that parking garage slowly, watching as police cruisers started pulling up to the hotel entrance. My lawyer's associates had made the calls right after my speech. By morning, Richard's entire operation would be under investigation. This was never about just the money. It was about principle, about pride, about the one thing they never thought I had the nerve to protect: my daughter's dignity. And while tonight was the scandal of the century, tomorrow would be the collapse of an empire. Morning came like a blade. The headlines hit before sunrise. Every major news outlet, every business wire, every social media feed was saturated with one name: Richard Caldwell, disgraced CEO, financial fraud, under federal investigation. I sat in my kitchen, black coffee in hand, watching the disaster unfold on my laptop. Federal agents raided multiple offices this morning in connection to an ongoing investigation involving Caldwell Enterprises and several high-ranking executives. Sources close to the investigation allege tax evasion, embezzlement, money laundering, and wire fraud tied to shell corporations overseas. The scandal broke following a shocking wedding reception speech from the father of the bride, who remains unnamed. That part made me smirk. Unnamed. For now. I wanted to focus squarely on Richard and his cronies. Let them devour each other before anyone starts knocking on my door. My hands? Spotless. My trail? Covered. See, I never needed to make myself famous. I just needed to make them infamous. My phone buzzed. It was my lawyer. Turn on Channel 8. I flipped the TV on. There it was, live footage of Richard Caldwell himself, in handcuffs, being escorted into an unmarked sedan. His usually smug face was twisted into something between rage and complete panic. Poetic. Less than 12 hours ago, he was standing under crystal chandeliers, smugly orchestrating my daughter's future like a chess match. Now, he was wearing a federal-issued silver bracelet set. But the best part? The feeding frenzy had just begun. His board members, the very men who once toasted champagne beside him, were already scrambling to distance themselves. Statements were being released, lawyers were issuing press briefings, and former allies were suddenly shocked and saddened by the allegations. Cowards. Every last one. Then came my favorite moment. I scrolled through a leaked email chain one of my contacts had forwarded me, internal boardroom chatter. "If Richard goes down, he'll try to drag everyone with him. We need to isolate exposure. Shred everything. Lawyer up. Blame Nancy. She facilitated many of the transfers through her personal accounts." There it was. The wolves turning on my wife. Nancy thought she was untouchable. She thought standing beside Richard gave her a throne. But thrones collapse fast when the gold underneath turns out to be fool's gold. Her so-called partners were already feeding her to the fire to save themselves. I didn't feel bad. Not even for a second. She chose this. She chose greed. She chose betrayal. And now? Now she would learn what loyalty really costs when you sell it to the highest bidder. My phone buzzed again. A text from my daughter. "Dad, can we meet?" I stared at the message for a long time. Because while the public battle was playing out perfectly, the private one, the one between me and my little girl, that was the war that actually mattered. We met at the park. No cameras. No media. Just the two of us. The same park I used to bring her to when she was a little girl. Back when her biggest concerns were scraped knees and melted ice cream cones. Back before life got complicated. Before people like Richard infected our world. She sat on the bench, hugging herself, staring out at the empty playground. Her eyes were swollen. The sleepless night had hollowed her face. I approached quietly, letting her speak first. "Dad," she whispered. I sat down beside her, giving her space. "I didn't know," she said, voice trembling. I swear to God, I didn't know. I nodded. I believe you. The word surprised her. She blinked, as if waiting for some kind of punishment. But I wasn't here for that. Everything I did last night, I continued, I did to protect you. Her lip quivered. You ruined my wedding. No, I corrected softly. They ruined your wedding long before I ever spoke. I simply exposed the truth. She shook her head, her voice breaking. But how did I not see it? How could I have been so blind? Because they played you, sweetheart. All of them. Richard, your mother, even him. My throat tightened at the thought of the man she nearly married. She wiped her tears. When did you find out? Months ago, I said. The signs were everywhere. The secret meetings, the contracts, the financial advice Richard kept offering you under the guise of family support. But the worst was your mother. Her face hardened. Mom, I nodded. She wasn't protecting you. She was cashing in on you. They promised her a stake in Caldwell Enterprises, private accounts, real estate deals. But she's my mother, my daughter whispered, more to herself than to me. I looked her dead in the eye. And she chose money over you. Silence hung between us. Heavy. Honest. Finally, she asked the question I knew was coming. What happens now? And that's when the fire inside me flickered steady again. Now? Now they burn. Completely. The authorities have enough to bury Richard and his entire circle of vultures. Your mother? She'll face her own consequences. And you? I paused. You start over. Free. With your name, your dignity, and your future intact. But what about you, Dad? What happens to you? I smiled faintly. I rebuild. Like I always have. She reached out suddenly, grabbing my hand. The same way she did when she was a child afraid of the dark. I'm so sorry, Dad, she cried. For everything. I should have listened to you. I squeezed her hand gently. No, you don't owe me an apology. You trusted people you loved. That's not a crime, sweetheart. That's being human. We sat there for a long while. No words. Just the wind cutting through the bare trees. Two people who finally saw each other again through the smoke and the wreckage. But even as we sat there, I knew the storm still wasn't fully over. Because one more snake hadn't shown its face yet. Nancy. And her turn was coming next. The next time I saw Nancy, she wasn't wearing diamonds. No silk dress. No perfectly painted smile. She was wearing desperation. We met at her lawyer's office. Not by my choice, of course. She requested the meeting. Requested. Imagine that. The woman who sold out her husband and daughter now needed my attention. I walked into that conference room and found her sitting there, smaller somehow. Like the gravity around her had grown heavier overnight. Her lawyer, a slick, sweaty little man with expensive cufflinks, stood as I entered. Mr. Reynolds, thank you for agreeing to meet. I nodded but didn't shake his hand. My eyes stayed on Nancy. Her voice was brittle when she spoke. Can we talk? I'm here, aren't I? I said coolly. Speak. She swallowed hard. That confident edge she once carried, it was gone. Stripped away by the headlines, the FBI agents, the frozen bank accounts. They're targeting me, she started, her voice cracking. The investigators. Richard's people, they're making it look like I was the mastermind behind everything. I didn't respond. She kept digging. They're throwing me under the bus, David. I had no idea the extent of what Richard was doing. I raised one eyebrow. No idea? I repeated, my voice steady. You signed the transfers. You attended the meetings. You took the offshore payouts. Don't insult me, Nancy. She flinched. For the first time since this whole thing began, I saw it in her eyes. Fear. You don't understand. Oh no, Nancy. I cut her off. I understand perfectly. You thought you were clever. You thought selling out your daughter for power would finally elevate you. Richard dangled a throne in front of you, and you trampled over your own family to grab it. Tears welled up, but I wasn't moved. Not anymore. My accounts are frozen. The house, everything. It's all under investigation. They're threatening prison. I leaned forward, lowering my voice, cold as winter steel. Good. Her face twisted. David, please. I'm your wife. You were my wife, I corrected. Now you're nothing more than another co-conspirator. Her lawyer tried to interrupt, sensing how badly she was unraveling. Mr. Reynolds, perhaps we can discuss some sort of. Don't speak, I snapped, cutting him off without looking away from her. There's nothing to negotiate. Nancy's breathing quickened. You're really going to let them destroy me? I paused, studied her face. The woman I once loved. The mother of my child. The one who chose greed over blood. You destroyed yourself, Nancy. I simply moved out of the way. And with that, I stood up. The lawyer stammered something behind me, but I was already gone. As I walked out of that office, I didn't feel satisfaction. No victory dance. No smug grin. What I felt was colder, deeper, closure. One by one, they were all falling. But there was still one final piece on the board. The groom. And his moment was coming next. They say rats scatter when the ship sinks. Well, this rat didn't even get the chance. The groom, that little opportunist, tried to stay quiet while the storm consumed Richard and Nancy. He stayed low, avoided cameras, avoided statements, pretended to be some innocent party caught in the middle of family drama. I let him enjoy the illusion, for a little while. But you see, he made one fatal mistake. He left a trail. They always leave a trail. The offshore accounts he used to receive his consulting fees from Richard, the secret condo he put under a friend's name, the wire transfers from shell companies tied directly to Richard's illegal mergers, all of it, documented, traced, and neatly packaged by my forensic accountant. So when the federal agents finally knocked on his apartment door, they didn't knock twice. I wasn't there to see it, but I didn't need to be. The photo leaked to the press was enough. Him, in sweatpants, hands cuffed behind his back, eyes wide with terror. His mugshot was plastered across every business and gossip site before the end of the day. Groom in high society wedding caught in multi-million-dollar fraud scandal. The comments section was brutal. They shredded him. The court of public opinion gave no mercy. And while he sat in a federal holding cell trying to cut deals and sell out anyone he could, Richard, Nancy, even his own friends, I knew something he didn't. There was no one left to save him. They were all drowning together. Every deal, every backroom meeting, every signature was already in the hands of prosecutors. The dominoes kept falling. Even the media, which once paraded them around as power families, had now fully turned. The tabloids labeled them the wedding that destroyed an empire. Poetic, really. I received a call from my attorney that afternoon. David, he said, it's done. All of it. All charges filed? I asked. Every last one. Financial crimes, wire fraud, tax evasion, racketeering, you name it. And my daughter? Clean. Completely exonerated. Thanks to your documentation, they'll never touch her. I closed my eyes for a moment, exhaling a breath I didn't even know I'd been holding since that cursed engagement began. Finally, the vultures had eaten each other, and I stood where I belonged, outside of their twisted little circle, untouched. But even in that victory, there was still one more thing left for me to do. Something personal. Something I had been waiting on for a long, long time. Most people think revenge is loud, explosive, dramatic. No. The most satisfying revenge is quiet, clean, permanent. With the criminal side dismantled, I turned my focus to the final piece, their money. Or rather, what was left of it. You see, while they were busy laundering millions offshore and cooking books for years, I had spent my time building something much simpler, proof. I didn't just want them jailed. I wanted them ruined. During my research, I'd found something their lawyers had overlooked. Richard and Nancy had secured several business loans, investments, and acquisitions using fraudulent collateral, stolen patents, and falsified valuations. Which meant one thing. Their entire financial empire had been built on sand. Legally, their assets were contaminated. I made one phone call. A very expensive phone call to a group of very skilled forensic auditors who specialized in corporate asset seizures and bankruptcy restructuring. The kind of people who don't blink at tearing apart multi-million-dollar portfolios for sport. Within 72 hours, federal authorities froze every remaining asset. Real estate, vehicles, trusts, stock options, private accounts, everything. Even Nancy's personal shopping accounts got flagged. The woman couldn't buy a coffee without it being declined. But I wasn't finished. With the financial house of cards dismantled, the banks came next. Lenders who once drooled over Richard's balance sheets suddenly realized how deep they were exposed in bad loans and false securities. Lawsuits piled up like firewood. By the end of that week, every single major creditor filed civil suits to recover losses. They weren't just broke. They were buried. I watched the news from my office that Friday afternoon. Caldwell family assets liquidated to cover mounting civil and criminal judgments. Multiple properties to be auctioned. Sources report Nancy Reynolds Caldwell now facing personal bankruptcy. The media didn't even bother using their first names anymore. They were just headlines now. Cautionary tales. My phone buzzed. It was my daughter. Dad, how did you even do all this? I stared at the message for a long time. Finally, I replied. Because they forgot one rule, sweetheart. Never corner a man who has nothing left to lose. I leaned back in my chair. The room was quiet. No more fires to put out. No more snakes to expose. And yet, even with the empire in ashes, one ember still glowed in the rubble. The divorce. Yes, Nancy and I still had to finalize that little formality. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. Neutral ground, her lawyer's office. The final step, divorce settlement. Nancy was already seated when I arrived. No jewelry, no designer clothes, no entourage. Just her pale, brittle, smaller than the woman I once married. Stripped of everything but her name. Her attorney, that same greasy snake from before, tried to put on a brave face, pretending like they still had leverage. We believe, given Mrs. Caldwell's current circumstances, a fair division of remaining marital assets is appropriate to ensure her financial survival. I almost laughed. Survival? There were no remaining marital assets. That ship sailed the moment she chose Richard's blood money over her own family. My attorney calmly opened his briefcase and slid a single manila folder across the table. Inside were copies of every subpoena, every seizure order, every frozen account, all tied to her direct involvement. The attorney paled as he flipped through them. Nancy stared at me, pleading now. Desperate. David, she whispered. Please, don't do this. I looked at her. Not with rage. Not with hate. With nothing. Do what, Nancy? I replied softly. Hold you accountable? You did that all by yourself. Her attorney cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Reynolds, surely you don't intend to leave Mrs. Caldwell entirely destitute. After all, she was your wife. I leaned forward, calm as ice. She was my wife. And for 2 years, she sold out our daughter behind my back. She funneled stolen funds through Richard's companies. She used her access to my name, my accounts, my trust for fraud. I locked eyes with Nancy. And while she played house with criminals, I protected our daughter. I built safeguards. I covered debts. I paid for that wedding. I paid for everything. The room fell silent. Her lawyer tried one last, pathetic attempt. If this goes to court, we may argue for alimony. My attorney smiled thinly. You're free to argue anything you like. But considering the pending criminal charges and the civil suits that will follow, your client won't qualify for any spousal support. In fact, he pulled out another sheet. We're prepared to file for damages incurred from her fraudulent activity during the marriage. Her lawyer sank back, defeated. He knew. It was over. Nancy's lip trembled, but no words came. Her carefully built world was gone. Not just the money, the power, the image, her reputation, all of it, ashes. I stood. This agreement leaves her with nothing but personal belongings, clothing, and whatever dignity she can still salvage for herself. Sign it, or I'll drag her through federal court for the next 5 years. She signed. Quiet. Broken. Done. As I stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not joy. Not victory. Freedom. The chains were cut. The war was over. But there was one last thing I had to do. The most important piece. Healing my daughter. After the smoke clears, that's when the real work starts. Revenge? That was easy. Rebuilding trust with my daughter. That was the hard part. We met again a week after the divorce was finalized. This time at my house. The house where she grew up. The house that stayed untouched while her mother chased mansions and penthouses. She stood at the door like she was visiting a memory. Her eyes scanned the familiar porch, the wind chimes swaying gently. I opened the door and simply said, "Come in." She walked inside slowly, her hands brushing the photos along the hallway, the ones her mother once begged me to take down because they didn't match the decor. Photos of birthdays, school plays, summer barbecues, real life, ours. We sat in the kitchen. The same kitchen where she used to sit doing homework while I cooked dinner after long days at work. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I don't know how to fix this, Dad. I nodded. Neither do I. But we start here. Tears welled in her eyes. I feel so stupid. I reached across the table and grabbed her hand, the same hand I once held steady as she learned how to ride a bike. No. You trusted the people who were supposed to protect you. That doesn't make you stupid. That makes them evil. She swallowed hard. Mom, she's facing jail time. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Nancy made her choices, and she would live with them. I just don't understand, my daughter whispered. How does a mother do that to her own child? I squeezed her hand gently, because she lost sight of what mattered. She traded family for power, and power never fills the hole it promises to. She wiped her eyes, breathing shakily. I feel like my whole life was a lie. No, I shook my head firmly. Their world was a lie, not yours. You are still you. You've still got your life, your future, and you still have me. Her lip trembled. I almost married a monster. I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. And you didn't, because you woke up in time. That's what matters. She looked up at me. How did you know? How did you stay so calm while everything was happening behind your back? I smiled faintly. Because I've spent my whole life getting knocked down, sweetheart. You learn not to panic when you've been in the mud before. And you learn exactly how to get back up. She stared at me for a long time. Then something shifted. Her eyes softened, not with sadness, but with something stronger. Pride. You're stronger than all of them, she whispered. No, I said. We are. For the first time since that cursed engagement, she smiled. A real one. The one I hadn't seen since before they tried to steal her away. We sat there, just father and daughter. No lawyers. No cameras. No vultures circling above us. Just us. The real family that survived. The vultures circled for weeks. Reporters. Journalists. Podcasters. Everyone wanted the exclusive interview with the father who blew up the wedding. I ignored them at first. Let them speculate. Let them twist their little versions of the truth. But then came the letter. A handwritten note. Rare these days. From a journalist I actually respected, Michael Brenner, investigative reporter with a reputation for getting it right. His note was simple. I'm not interested in selling tabloids. I'm interested in telling the real story, yours. If you want your daughter's truth protected, let's talk. I debated it for days. And then I made my decision. If I didn't speak, others would. And I was damned if I was going to let the vultures rewrite history while my daughter tried to heal. We met at a private studio, no audience, no live broadcast. Just me, Brenner, and the truth. The cameras rolled. He started carefully. Mr. Reynolds, why did you choose to expose the fraud at your daughter's wedding and so publicly? I met his gaze. Because they forced me to, I said flatly. They spent months orchestrating a betrayal behind my back, behind my daughter's back. The wedding was the endgame of that scheme. They thought I would sit quietly and let it happen. You weren't worried about embarrassing your daughter? That was never my intention, I said. I was protecting her, saving her from signing her life away to people who saw her as nothing but a financial asset. He nodded, leaning in. Some are calling you ruthless. That you dismantled multiple lives and reputations. I smiled faintly. They dismantled themselves. All I did was shine a light on what they were hiding. Brenner paused, then asked the question everyone wanted. Do you feel any guilt for what happened to your wife? I didn't blink. No. The answer landed like a hammer. My wife betrayed not just me, but our daughter. She knew exactly what she was doing. She made her choice. And the groom? Predator. Manipulator. Opportunist. He thought marrying into my family would buy him immunity. Instead, it bought him prison time. Brenner let the silence breathe. Some say you destroyed an empire. No, I corrected. I destroyed a lie. The interview wrapped, but before leaving, Brenner shook my hand. You did what most fathers wouldn't have the stomach to do. I looked him in the eye one last time. No father should ever be forced to do what I did. But if they ever come for my family again, I'll do it twice as hard. The interview aired 2 days later. The response was immediate. For once, the world saw the truth, not the scandal, but the survival. The man who refused to be bought. The father who stood up. And while my name was cleared, my daughter finally walked with her head high again. A few weeks passed after the interview. Life had finally begun to settle. The vultures had flown off. The lawsuits were grinding through the courts. The media moved on to fresher scandals. And for the first time in years, I slept. But peace has a way of attracting its enemies. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I heard a knock on my door. No appointment. No warning. I opened it. And there he was. Richard Caldwell. But not the Richard from the wedding. Not the smug billionaire holding champagne, surrounded by yes-men. No. This was the hollowed-out shell. A man stripped of his empire, reputation, freedom. He stood there in a wrinkled suit, thinner, paler, I sunken. Desperate. I didn't say a word. I let him speak first. David, he rasped. I just want to talk. I crossed my arms. You've got 2 minutes. He stepped inside, glancing around like a man searching for an exit. His voice cracked as he spoke. They're trying to pin everything on me. His hands trembled. The board. Your ex-wife. The prosecutors. They want to bury me. I stared. You deserve to be buried. He flinched. David, listen to me. We both know this whole thing got out of hand. It was supposed to be simple. Simple. My voice rose. You tried to purchase my daughter's life. You tried to buy her future, chain her to your criminal enterprise. That's simple. His breath quickened. Look. I still have contacts. Leverage. If you help me, I can make sure your daughter is protected in the civil suits. I can pull some strings. I couldn't help but smile, not out of humor. Out of disgust. Protected? My daughter is already protected. You lost everything. You've got no strings left, Richard. He took a desperate step forward. Don't you get it? If I fall completely, they'll keep digging. Everyone. Your ex-wife is cutting deals with prosecutors. She'll drag your name into it if she thinks it'll save her. Ah, there it was. The last desperate threat of a drowning man. I stepped forward now, closing the distance. Let me make something very clear, I said, my voice low and controlled. Every document, every deal, every dollar trail leads to you and Nancy. You manipulated my family. You used my wife's greed. You used my daughter's innocence. I leaned in, dropping my voice even colder. If you try to pull my name into this, Richard, I'll make sure you don't see daylight again. And trust me, I've got more than enough receipts to make that happen. He opened his mouth to respond, but the weight of it all crushed him. His shoulders sank. His breath grew shallow. You should leave now, I whispered. He stood there for a moment longer, like a man who realized his last bargaining chip just slipped from his hand. Then, quietly, he turned and walked out. I closed the door behind him. No slamming. No shouting. Just the cold, heavy sound of the lock sliding into place. That was the last time I ever saw Richard Caldwell. The courtroom was full that morning. Journalists packed the gallery. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop the swarm of media waiting outside the courthouse steps. Every seat filled. Every eye fixed on the defendants. Richard Caldwell. Nancy Reynolds Caldwell. And the groom, the man who nearly became my son-in-law. 3 faces. 3 shattered lives. 3 people who thought they could play God with my family. I sat in the second row, just behind the prosecution table. My daughter sat beside me, stronger now. Wiser. Her hand gripped mine as the judge read through the long list of charges. Wire fraud. Tax evasion. Money laundering. Conspiracy. Racketeering. Bank fraud. A symphony of greed, finally facing its final note. The judge's voice was calm, almost surgical. Mr. Richard Caldwell, this court sentences you to 22 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom shifted. Some gasped. Others whispered. But Richard? He barely reacted. He sat there, hollowed out. The man was gone long before the sentence came. This was only the paperwork. Next came Nancy. Mrs. Nancy Reynolds Caldwell, given your cooperation with authorities and partial admission of guilt, this court sentences you to 7 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 4. Her attorney squeezed her arm. But I saw it in her eyes, the panic, the regret, the cost of everything she once craved. She glanced back at me for a brief moment. I didn't flinch. Not out of cruelty, but because she no longer existed to me. Finally came the groom. He looked smaller than ever. No tailored tuxedo, no arrogant smirk, just another scared con man in a cheap suit. For your role in financial conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and tax evasion, this court sentences you to 11 years. The gavel fell. Done. They were all going away. As the bailiffs moved in to escort them out one by one, my daughter held her breath. Her hand tightened. She trembled, not out of fear. Out of release. When Nancy passed our row, she tried to meet my daughter's eyes. She didn't look back. Good. She finally understood. The price had been paid. We walked out into the cool afternoon air. The press swarmed, but we pushed through silently. No statements. No drama. Just peace. But as we reached my truck, my daughter stopped and turned to me. Dad, she said softly, you saved my life. I shook my head. No, sweetheart. You saved yourself. You listened when it mattered. She smiled, the real one I thought I might never see again. We drove home in silence. But it wasn't an empty silence. You don't really move on from something like that. You rebuild around it. Like a scar, always there, but no longer bleeding. 6 months had passed since the sentencing. The headlines had moved on to fresher scandals. The courtrooms were empty. The vultures found new corpses to circle. And me? I was finally living again. My daughter had moved back into the house for a while. At first, it was temporary, or that's what she told herself. But deep down, I think we both needed the time together. We filled the house again with small, simple things. Cooking, old movies, late-night talks on the porch with coffee in hand. We didn't talk much about what happened. Not because we avoided it, but because neither of us wanted that darkness to own the air between us. One evening, she came home from work, carrying 2 large boxes. "What's that?" I asked, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "Books," she said. "Law books." I raised an eyebrow. She smiled shyly. "I'm going back to school." For a moment, I froze. Not out of doubt, but out of pride swelling too fast in my chest. "Law?" I finally asked. She nodded. "Family law. Financial law, too. I want to help people who get trapped like I almost did." I couldn't help it. The grin broke across my face before I could stop it. She was stronger than any revenge I could have ever planned. "You'll be damn good at it," I said quietly. She bit her lip, holding back tears, and hugged me tight. And right there, in that old kitchen, I realized something. That was my victory. Not the court cases. Not the arrests. Not the headlines. Her strength. Her freedom. Her future. That was the justice I wanted from the very beginning. The vultures tried to take everything from her. Instead, they built the strongest version of her that ever existed. Spring had arrived. The trees bloomed. The air smelled clean again. It almost felt like normal life. Almost. Until one afternoon, when I heard that knock on my door. Sharp. Steady. The kind of knock you don't get from neighbors. I opened it, and there stood a face I hadn't seen since the very first days of this mess. Nancy's sister. Lucy. Always the quiet one. Always watching. Never getting her hands dirty, but always standing close enough to enjoy the benefits. She smiled politely, but her eyes were full of that same thin calculation I'd seen too many times before. "David," she said sweetly. "May I come in?" I stepped aside but said nothing. We sat at the dining room table. She crossed her legs, took a slow breath, and got to it. "I'm sure you've heard," she started. "Nancy, well, prison hasn't been kind to her." I kept my face neutral. She continued. "She's been reaching out. She wants to speak with you." I didn't respond. Let the silence choke her. Lucy leaned forward slightly. "She's changed, David. She's broken. She wants to make peace." Peace. The word tasted bitter coming out of her mouth. I spoke carefully. "You're here because you think there's something to salvage. Maybe an ounce of pity left in me." Her eyes flickered. "She's still the mother of your daughter." "No." I shook my head. "She forfeited that title the day she sold out her own child." Lucy sighed, frustrated now. "David, you've won. You made your point. You've burned it all to the ground." I smiled faintly. "No, Lucy. I didn't burn it. They did. I simply handed them the matches they were already holding." Her lips pressed thin. "So you won't see her?" I stared right through her. She made her choice. She lives with it. I don't owe her forgiveness. Not today. Not ever. The mask cracked on her face, just for a second. She finally understood there was nothing left for her here. Lucy stood up, smoothing her skirt, trying to reclaim some dignity. "You're colder than I remember," she muttered. I stood too, walking her to the door. "No," I said. "I'm done." She left without another word. The door shut behind her with a click that so undid like the final nail in a coffin. And for the first time since this war started, there were no more knocks. No more schemes. No more ghosts. Months turned into a year. No more headlines. No more lawsuits. No more desperate visitors. The story faded from public memory like all scandals eventually do. But for us, for my daughter and me, its echoes never fully disappeared. The house felt different now. Not empty, clean, purged. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the wind bend through the trees. And I'd think about all of it. The betrayal, the humiliation, the anger that nearly consumed me. I never asked for revenge. But once they forced my hand, I swore I'd see it through completely. And I did. But what surprised me most was what followed. Peace. Not the kind of hollow peace that comes from simply surviving, but the kind that comes from knowing you protected the only thing that ever truly mattered. My daughter flourished. Her classes consumed her days, but every evening she'd call or stop by. Her confidence grew. Her smile was genuine again. We built something stronger between us, something deeper than any father-daughter bond we ever had before. One night, As we sat outside under the stars, she broke the silence. "You ever regret it, Dad?" she asked softly. I didn't need to ask what she meant. "No," I said, calm and certain. "Not for a second." She stared out across the yard. "Sometimes I do," she admitted. "Not because of them, but because I let it go so far. I was blind." I turned to her. "You trusted," I said. "That's not blindness. That's humanity." She smiled, small but strong. "I just don't know if I'll ever trust anyone again." I nodded slowly. "You will," I said. "But you'll never trust blindly again. There's a difference." The stars flickered above us, silent witnesses to everything we'd endured. "That man you almost married," I added. "He taught you how dangerous the wrong kind of love can be. But he also taught you what to look for in the right kind." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there like that for a long while. For the first time since the day of that cursed wedding, I allowed myself to finally feel something I hadn't allowed in a long time. Peace. Real peace.